In a world where deception hides under the mask of friendship, the main character finds himself trapped in intrigue and manipulation. How far is he willing to go to get his life back and expose those who betrayed him? Are you planning to leave on time? I looked up to see my boss, Barry Masters, peeking into my office with his usual grin, the same one he'd wear when he'd come to my house for dinner, hinting at his interest in spending time with my wife. Let me start from the beginning. My name's Bill Jakswinski, pronounced Jakswinski. Most people call me Billy Jack, or just Jacko. I'm a 35-year-old account executive at a small advertising agency in Houston, Texas. If I were an account executive at a major agency in New York or Los Angeles, it would mean power, responsibility, money, and respect. However, at BM & Sons, it just means I handle all the work while Barry relaxes and reads his romance novels. He has a habit of indulging in books meant for an easy read, especially the dramatic love stories. So here's this guy poking his head into my office, asking if I'm leaving on time, which he clearly knows I will be. Since he hired Amy, an intern with a notable background in marketing, leaving the office on time has been more straightforward. But since tonight is the night, I told him I had a few tasks to complete and would be out in half an hour. Fine, I'll dine at the Royal Fork, but I expect you and Lynn to be ready when I arrive, he replied. Ready usually meant having everything set up for a smooth evening. Barry likes things to be just right, and I go along to keep things professional. I met my wife Lynn 10 years ago at a Christmas party hosted by a local bank. They were Barry's largest client, and their partnership was essential for the agency. Since I primarily managed their account, I was invited to the event. Lynn worked as a teller at their drive-up branch. I spent the evening mingling with some of the staff I regularly interacted with. At one point, I was chatting with the loan department manager about an upcoming golf outing. His usual partner couldn't make it, so I agreed to fill in. Since Barry closed our office from Christmas Eve until New Year's Day, the timing worked out perfectly. While chatting about golf with the group attending the outing, I noticed a few women starting to join our small circle. We were discussing our handicaps when a well-built blonde interrupted. "Hey Bob, why haven't any of the tellers been invited to this event?" She was dressed in the classic little black dress. Her cleavage was really pushing the boundaries of her bodice, and my gaze was fixed on her like a hawk on prey. I barely realized she was addressing me directly when she asked, "So what's your handicap?" I'm certainly no neurosurgeon, nor am I an expert on how the human brain works. So I can't explain why the only thing that came out of my mouth in response to her golf question was, "Great tea." Laughter erupted from all around. I could feel my face heating up. "That's really funny," someone commented. "Damn, why can't I think of clever responses like that?" another person wondered. The girl in the black cocktail dress and high heels laughed and then said, "Well, I guess you'll be stuck in the traps all day." Fortunately, I managed to recover and play it off as a joke. "I seriously doubt I'll spend the entire day in the traps. Not many scratch golfers do." "Wow, are you considered a scratch?" Bob asked. "No, but it sounded impressive." This sparked another round of laughter. I didn't bother mentioning that I had nearly attended Q school before Barry hired me. The conversation returned to golf, and I felt relieved, realizing I hadn't completely embarrassed myself. If I had, Barry might not have been too happy. Soon the group began to disperse, and I found myself back at the bar. "Would you like to buy my assets a drink?" I turned to meet the icy blue eyes of the woman in the little black dress. "Not exactly, but I'd like to buy their owner a drink to make up for my Freudian slip." She laughed, and we ended up talking the entire night. When the event wrapped up, she gave me a goodnight kiss and headed toward her car. "I'll see you at the golf course, sir. Just wait until you see what I wear." I swallowed, a bit flustered, wondering if she'd show up in sporty attire or something a bit more eye-catching. I waved goodbye, already anticipating the outing. I assumed Barry and his wife Joan were seeing other people on the side. It seemed like the only reason they attended these events was to meet new people. I often wondered if they still connected with each other and questioned whether Barry was truly the father of all his sons, whom none of us had ever met. In my first month working for Barry, Joan approached me multiple times with rather bold proposals, but in the end, my sense of professionalism and the concern that Barry might fire me kept me from getting involved. In hindsight, I'm probably better off for it. On Wednesday morning, I headed to the golf club and encountered the group from the bank. The weather was damp and chilly, so I was certain everyone would opt for long pants instead of shorts. Being a Wyoming native, I typically wore shorts for most of the year. 90% unless I was at work, of course. Half of the group from the party didn't turn up. They were trying to figure out how to split 13 people into groups when I arrived. "Billy, so glad you made it," Bob greeted me warmly. "We expected to form 5 or 6 foursomes, but as you can see, we're short on numbers. Would you mind playing in a pair?" I agreed to join a twosome, though I was deeply disappointed that Lynn wasn't there initially. I was informed that I would be paired with Jerry Montez, a commercial loan officer. However, when a member of the first foursome failed to show up at their tee time, Bob asked Jerry to join them instead. With my new partner still missing, and the second group about to take their tee shot, Bob was figuring out what to do when he suddenly said, "All right, Billy, here's your partner. Try to stay away from the bunkers." As everyone laughed, I looked up to see my partner approaching. "Sorry, I got delayed trying to buy some teas," she said. I turned around to find Lynn dressed in a purple fleece pullover and thick knit yoga pants. While her pullover concealed any hint of cleavage, her pants accentuated her figure. "Where is everyone?" she inquired. "The first group is probably on the green by now," Bob replied. "Would you be okay playing a pair with Billy here?" She gave me a playful wink. "As long as he's brought his money." "Oh, right, I forgot to mention. We place bets on everything. Typically, during a foursome, we wager drinks, dares, or whatever anyone wants to bet. High stroke counts mean a person buys drinks at the turn," Bob explained. "I hope you came prepared, Billy," she added. I remained silent. Bob was chuckling as he positioned himself on the white tee box, hitting a solid drive before the foursome moved down the fairway. Lynn and I headed to our own tee box. "Ladies first," I offered, as she bent to place her tee. I couldn't help but appreciate her form as she set up. "Stop admiring my backside, you rascal." Oh no, had she noticed me looking? "I wasn't. I was watching your teammates struggle in the rough," I replied. She glanced down the fairway where someone was wrestling with the long grass about 100 yards away. "Oh," she said with a grin. "I didn't mean to call you a rascal. I just thought—" "Yeah, I know. You thought I was admiring you," she gasped. "Oh, so you were. I'll have to keep an eye on you. To keep things fair, I get to look at you while you tee up." "All right," I laughed. "It's your shot. They're on the green now." She sent the ball down the fairway, grinning at me. "Beat that, Mr. Smooth." I stepped up to the black tee box and set up my shot. "And if I do, what's in it for me?" I asked. "If you outdrive me, I'll play the back nine in my favorite sporty outfit," she teased. Her playful challenge fired me up, but I kept my focus and hit a 280-yard drive curving around the dogleg. "I bet you'll look fantastic," I said, smiling. She smirked. Darn. Not only did I enjoy the game, but we ended up going on 3 dates after that. 3 months later, we became exclusive. I learned early on that she thought Barry was difficult. Once, over dinner, she asked if there were any women in my office. Thinking she was worried, I reassured her that the only woman was Jane, our wise and witty receptionist. "I bet that creep still checks her out," Lynn laughed. I couldn't help but laugh too, imagining Barry eyeing Jane and her giving him a dose of her usual sass. That Thanksgiving I met Lynn's parents, who had flown in from San Diego. After dinner I surprised her by proposing with a ring on a pie plate. We got married the following May on a boat in Galveston, and my parents gave us a house as a wedding gift. My dad said, "At least you'll have a place of your own, son." I told them divorce wasn't in our future, but appreciated the thought. After our honeymoon, Lynn and I moved in and started building a life together. For the first 4 years, everything was wonderful. But then finances began to strain our relationship. At first, I trusted Lynn to handle the bills, thinking her bank job meant she was good with money. But it turned out otherwise. It took over a year to get back on track after I took over the finances. We had some long talks and a few tense nights, but gradually, with raises and careful budgeting, we got back on our feet. Yet within 2 years, we were struggling again. Her income mainly went toward credit card payments, while mine covered the essentials. Barry wasn't paying me enough, so I considered finding a better job, but my limited experience worried me. 1 week, everything seemed to go downhill. After covering the bills, I managed to set aside a little for groceries, gas, and emergencies. Monday at work was routine until Barry called Walt into his office. Things escalated quickly. I could hear Walt's voice rising, and soon they were both shouting. The only clear part was Walt calling Barry a spineless idiot as he stormed out of the office. On his way out, he shot me a glare and warned, "You better watch your back." That phrase stuck with me, rattling around my mind the rest of the day, so much so that I nearly had a close call on the road heading home. When I arrived, I noticed something odd. Lynn was home early, and there was a brand new white couch, love seat, and armchairs in the living room. "Hey, honey," she said. "Do you like it? I took the day off and went shopping. Found this set and loved it so much I bought it. Are you mad?" "Did they come free?" I asked, trying to keep calm. She laughed. "Of course not. But they offered a good deal with new payment terms." I managed to smile. I knew that saying anything might lead to a long, frustrating conversation, so I went to the den to check how much deeper we were now in debt. After reviewing everything, I realized switching jobs and taking a pay cut wasn't an option. I disliked working for Barry, but at least, after Lynn made big purchases, she usually showed me some affection. Maybe this time I'd enjoy the moment. After dinner, we relaxed on her new couch, watched TV, and I made my move. I started to kiss her, but she playfully pushed me away. "Not here, mister. We're not going to do anything on this couch, but if you get me into bed, then I don't mind." By the time I got to work the next morning, I was a bit worn out, but kept going with a few cups of coffee. When Barry arrived, he gave me an odd look, but went straight to his office. Soon after, a striking young woman walked in. Jane greeted her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes, I'm Amy Stewart, here for my 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Barry Masters." After Jane's call, Amy was directed to Barry's office. Later I called Lynn, and as expected, she was home. "You didn't go to work?" I asked, half annoyed, half proud. "I called in late," she said. "Someone wore me out last night." "You know it," I laughed, and we hung up. I was setting up an ad when Barry walked out with the young woman. "Amy, this is Jacko. Jacko, meet Amy. She's replacing Walt and will be shadowing you for the next few days." Barry then headed back to his office. "I'm Bill Jakswensky, but everyone calls me Jacko," I said. "Amy Stewart," she replied, shaking my hand. I was half tempted to kiss it, but resisted. "Can I call you Bill?" "Sure," I said, and we got to work. Amy quickly impressed me. She clearly knew the advertising game. I wondered why someone with her talent was in Barry's small agency when she could have easily made it in a top firm. That night I went home and spent more time with Lynn, though it wasn't an all-nighter like before. By morning, I felt pretty clear-headed. Around noon, Barry called me into his office, visibly upset. "You screwed up, Jacko." "I messed up? How?" He showed me an ad for a car dealership's $500 giveaway that somehow advertised a $5,000 prize. Alan, the dealership owner, was furious and threatened to pull his account. "I calmed him down and we're printing a revised ad," Barry said. "I should fire you, Jacko, but I have a better idea. I want to meet you and Lynn for dinner at your house tonight. I'll be there at 6 o'clock. I had no clue why Barry wanted to involve Lynn, but I knew she disliked him and would probably do what she could to keep things tense. "What does that jerk want from me?" Lynn asked after I filled her in. "Probably just to get a glimpse of you or hint at something," I said half-jokingly. She rolled her eyes. "I'd rather look at paint dry." Dinner went well, though I was annoyed by Barry's glances at my wife. Lynn, wearing a long-sleeved turtleneck sweater, made it clear she wasn't interested. She shifted her seat to keep Barry's gaze in check despite the late spring warmth. After dinner, Barry leaned back and said, "Well, we've had a lovely meal," turning his gaze toward Lynn. "A wonderful dinner, my dear." Lynn blushed slightly and thanked him. He cleared his throat before continuing. "Lynn, I'm not sure if you're aware, but your husband nearly cost me a major account today." I had to suppress a chuckle. Lynn and I often joked about Barry's big aspirations, given that he ran a relatively small agency. "I see no reason to reprimand him as the issue was resolved," Barry added. "But," he continued, "he does need to learn not to be distracted by the new addition to the office." Lynn shot me a glance, and I scowled. I had already mentioned Amy to her, though I downplayed her looks. Lynn knew there was nothing to worry about. "What do you suggest we do to teach him, Barry?" "I suggest something that might get his attention," Barry said with a sly smile. I felt a flash of anger. Lynn looked just as appalled, and it was hard not to laugh at the expression of distaste on her face. Barry, however, continued on, oblivious. "Well, that's an interesting offer, Barry," she replied in a polite but calm tone. I knew right away she was about to shut him down completely. "But there are a couple of issues with your suggestion," she added. "First, my husband wouldn't stand for it, and second, he's the only one I care about. I think it's best to move past this and leave things where they are." "Your husband would never leave you, Lynn," Barry replied. "In fact, many men would dream of such an offer." "I'm not one of those men," I spoke up, but Barry barely seemed to hear me. "Even if he did divorce you, Lynn, he'd still have to support you. You'd receive half the house and alimony payments," Barry continued with a smirk. "So he'd be the one struggling, not you." "Listen, Barry," she said, "I love him, and I know he loves me. Why would I want to hurt him?" "You wouldn't hurt him. You'd just be taking control." She hesitated, so he pressed on. "Are you telling me, Lynn, that you enjoy needing his permission just to hang out with your friends? That you have to explain yourself whenever you buy something nice for yourself? Are you saying you're not even a little bit ready to make him beg for you?" "Lynn, what I'm offering will give you total power over him. All you need to do is tell me that he's stepping out of line, and I'll destroy him. I can ensure he never works in advertising again, and he'll be forced to work multiple jobs just to stay out of prison." After dinner, Barry leaned back and said, "Lynn, think about it. This could bring a whole new spark to your life. You'd have more freedom, and Jacko here would appreciate you even more, realizing just how much he cares for you." I thought, this guy has to be out of his mind. I was sure Lynn would shut him down, and I prepared myself for whatever fallout might come. But then she surprised me by saying, "What are we waiting for?" I sat there stunned, waiting for her to break into laughter and reveal it was all a joke. But as she and Barry began to act on his suggestion, I lost my patience. I grabbed Barry by the collar and pushed him toward the door. He started shouting threats about firing and suing me, and then Lynn stepped in. "Bill, stop that," she said sharply. "You can't be serious, Lynn. This guy's unbelievable." "I am serious, Bill. You almost lost his biggest account, and he's still willing to work with you. This is the least I can do to keep the peace." Barry jumped in, saying, "That's right, Jacko. Either take this or face the consequences." I felt trapped, but Lynn remained steadfast. "Look, Bill," she said, "think of this as a one-time thing." After Barry left, she joined me on the couch. "Stop sulking, Bill. Come to bed." "No way," I shot back. "You think I can just let this go?" She sighed. "It wasn't like that. It was just, he made it sound like I'd have more power, and it got to me. I felt in control." "Yeah, sure. The way you were talking made it sound like you enjoyed it more than you let on," I replied. "And if you really cared about me, you wouldn't have done it in the first place." "Come on, Bill," she tried. "This isn't going to last forever. I just got caught up in the moment. I'm only still here because I don't have any other choice. But make no mistake, this changes everything. I don't know how I'm supposed to look at you now," I said, struggling to keep my emotions in check. I lay on the couch, covering my eyes with one arm. I heard her quietly head off to the bedroom. My mind was a mess. I couldn't think clearly. I knew there had to be a solution to my problem, but I just couldn't see it. The next morning, I arrived at work early, trying to focus on my tasks. Things were going fine until Barry walked in, giving me a smug grin. It took everything in me not to get up and punch him right in the face. I wasn't sure yet how I would handle the whole situation, but pieces of a plan were starting to come together. After doing some research online, I knew what my first steps needed to be. Leaving work early wasn't going to be a problem. I also needed Lynn to be at work, and she probably was, given that Barry didn't seem like he'd worn her out. I spent most of my morning online, finding everything I needed to turn the tables on my wife. I might lose my job, but I wasn't about to lose my house. I found several places in Houston where I could get exactly what I was looking for. Around noon, I went to Barry's office and told him I was leaving. "I didn't say you could leave early," he replied. "Yes, you did. I made this appointment 3 weeks ago and told you about it then. I cleared it with you way in advance." I was lying, but Barry never remembered anything. Jane conned him out of 3 weeks of vacation every year, so I knew I'd get away with it. He stared blankly at the wall for a moment, then said, "Fine. I remember. Go ahead, but you'd better be home when I arrive tonight." "What? No one mentioned anything about—" "Jacko, we set this up last night. Maybe if you weren't sulking, you'd have known. Oh, and I've got a surprise for you tonight. I know you hate me, and that makes it even better." "I don't hate you, Barry, but I wouldn't bother putting you out if you were on fire." 6 o'clock, Jacko. Don't be late." "Fuck you," I muttered under my breath as I walked out of his office. My first stop was at an electronics store on the other side of town. I picked up several mini cameras and microphones. The salesperson explained how to set them up. He mentioned they were motion activated and sent the footage to a secure website, so even if my computer was compromised, the videos would be safe. Next, I visited an attorney's office. Paris Hyde had the most unusual name for a lawyer, but her reputation for helping men with marital issues was well known. I shared the entire story with her and explained how I was collecting evidence. She assured me that I wasn't required to disclose my surveillance since I was the sole owner of the property. She advised me to hold off on making any moves until she had everything prepared for filing. She also said I needed to sit through at least one more session to gather solid evidence for my case. According to Texas law, I could divorce her on grounds of cruelty or adultery, and sometimes both could be listed. She also suggested other strategies I could consider. I couldn't wait to see Barry's reaction. When I got home, I set up the cameras. I placed 3 in the bedroom, 2 in the dining room, and 2 more in the living room. By the time I finished, I had just enough time to move my clothes into my office. I also grabbed a pillow and blanket from the hallway closet. Lynn had only bought them because they were on sale. That closet was packed with stuff she bought on a whim. After I put the bedding in my office, I headed out to a bar. I returned around 9 p.m. to find Lynn sitting at the table with a glass of wine. I didn't say a word as I went straight to take a shower. For the first time since moving out of my parents' house, I locked the bathroom door. I thought I heard the door handle jiggle, but I wasn't sure. I smiled at the thought of regaining control over my life, and knowing she'd soon realize just how little control she had. I took my time getting dressed and headed straight to my office. A few minutes later, the door opened and Lynn walked in. Mentally, I added, "Buy a lock for the office door" to my to-do list. I had just logged onto my computer to check how much evidence my cameras had recorded while I was away. I quickly minimized the window as she sat on the corner of my desk. Seeing her there brought back memories. Sitting on the edge of my desk used to be her way of signaling she was in the mood. But now, all I saw was betrayal. She didn't say anything, just stared at a spot on the wall. "What?" I finally asked. "You've never locked me out of your shower before," she said with a sniffle. "You've never made me feel this way before," I replied, unable to hide my frustration. "It wasn't great," she admitted quietly. "It was a mistake. I realized then that I'd done you wrong." Her admission confirmed what I needed to know. "So you both just got caught up in the moment," I replied flatly. "Without me around, it just lost its appeal." "Well, I don't feel bad for either of you." "I thought you loved me," she murmured. "I did." "But then you crossed a line," I said firmly. "All I want is to find that same connection we once had," she replied. "And you're shutting me out. Can't you help me feel that way again?" I could see she was still caught up in the story Barry had sold her, and it hurt to see how deeply it had affected her. I told her to leave, and then I grabbed my keys and left the house myself, driving aimlessly until I reached Galveston. Being a Friday night, I had my choice of bars and ended up at one I'd never tried before. Galveston was a place Lynn and I used to go often, spending the day on the beach and wrapping up the night at a bar. As I sipped my drink, I noticed an old colleague, Hank Shaw, walk in. He used to work for Barry, but had left 5 years ago for a radio job. Hank noticed me and came over. "Bill, it's been a while." "Hey, Hank, how's radio treating you?" "No complaints." "Are you still with Barry?" "Unfortunately." "Did you hear Walt left?" "No, I hadn't heard. He came by the station a couple of years ago looking for a job. Told me Barry was making things unbearable." "I get it. I'm reaching that point myself. Honestly, Barry's driven off a lot of good people. Back when I worked there, he got involved with 2 different people's wives. What always shocked me was that no one ever stood up to him for it." Hank's group arrived, so he said goodbye and headed off to join them. 2 different wives. Something about it struck a chord. Suddenly, it occurred to me that maybe Walt hadn't been threatening me that day. He'd been warning me. Before leaving the bar, I asked Hank if he had any contact info for Walt. He didn't, so I headed out, determined to find out more. When I got home, I crashed on the couch, grateful I didn't see or hear Lynn. I was eager to get in touch with Walt, but finding him in a city as large as Houston felt impossible. Just as I was drifting off, the solution hit me. By the time I woke up Saturday morning, Lynn was already gone. I headed to Lowe's, bought a lock for my office, and installed it. Then I opened the camera footage on my computer. Watching the recording, I heard Barry apologizing repeatedly, and Lynn brushing it off, saying it would be better when I was back. "Speaking of Jacko," she began. A nickname I'd tolerated at work, but hearing her use it stung. "Barry agreed to ease up on me and mentioned some sort of surprise they had in store for me. Curious, I scrolled through the recordings until I saw Barry bringing in a bag. He mentioned a surprise, but Lynn quickly redirected him as they headed down the hallway, leaving the bag's contents a mystery. The rest of the weekend, I did my best to avoid Lynn. On Sunday night, I stayed in my office. She tried telling me about a visit from Barry, but the footage revealed otherwise. She'd been drinking wine alone, keeping herself entertained. Monday, as the workday ended, I stayed back in the office after everyone else had left. I knew Barry's password. He kept it on a sticky note in Jane's drawer and accessed his computer to locate Walt's address. I also added a vacation day to Barry's calendar for Wednesday. As I left the office, I thought I heard someone else but saw no one. Shrugging it off, I picked up a burger on my way home. Lynn hated when I ate fast food, so I figured it would be one more way to keep my distance. Tuesday passed quickly, and that evening Barry showed up to surprise me, a device meant to make things uncomfortable. They seemed to think it would get under my skin, but the reality was I hadn't felt any sort of attraction since all this started. What struck me was Barry mentioning bringing Amy into their plans. "Maybe we'll let Jacko get involved," he joked. I wondered if he had any chance of pulling her into his schemes. Hearing Lynn using her new purchase right after complimenting Barry's abilities added a strange sense of irony. And, in a twisted way, I found it amusing when Barry tried to flaunt his confidence. Anytime he implied he was more of a man, I couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. On Wednesday, I decided to visit Walt. I'd gotten his address from Barry's computer and rang the doorbell. A woman answered, and she looked like she'd once been beautiful, though time and hardship had clearly taken their toll. I felt guilty asking for Walt, especially as guilt flickered across her face, and by the time I thanked her and turned to leave, I noticed tears forming in her eyes. I almost offered a few comforting words, but decided against it, not knowing the full story. Following her directions, I found Walt in a modest motel just off the freeway. It wasn't the sort of place anyone would choose, but I figured it must have been affordable. I knocked, and a disheveled Walt answered, stepping back from the light like it might burn him. "Jacko, what are you doing here?" "I tried to catch you at home, but got pointed here." His expression fell, and he nodded knowingly. "Barry's already gotten to you, hasn't he? I should have warned you sooner. Come in." He stepped aside, and I entered his one-room setup. It had a single bed, a worn couch, and a small table with 2 unsteady chairs. "Jacko," he started, "part of what's happening to you, it's on me." "How could this possibly be your fault, Walt? You left before Barry started interfering with my life." "Let me explain," he said. "From the moment Barry met my wife, Marion, I knew he had intentions. That's just how he operates. He has this need to prove he can get his way. Appearance doesn't matter to him. I worked for Barry for 12 years. When I started, there was a guy named Jarvis in your position. He was married to a woman from Humble. She wasn't a model, but Jarvis adored her. One year, at a work Christmas party, Barry tried to make a move on her. Jarvis nearly sent Barry to the hospital. The next Monday, Jarvis was gone and Barry was still bruised. Then Barry brought in Hank Shaw to replace him. Eventually, Hank left, and I got pulled in closer to Barry's inner circle. That's when I saw how Barry operates. Barry didn't stop after what happened with Jarvis. He continued to go after his employees' spouses. Once, Barry called me in and claimed I'd made an error on an ad. He said he'd spent hours convincing the client to stick with us. Then he said he'd like to meet with my wife and me to discuss my future. That was when I learned just how far Barry would go. He told Marion that if she didn't comply, I'd lose my job. It was his way of teaching me a lesson. For 3 years, I didn't know what to do. Eventually, I confided in Joan about it. But little did I know she was aware and unfazed. When Barry found out I'd talked to Joan, he upped his game. He even had Marion stop taking her birth control, saying my punishment would be raising a child of his. I felt powerless, and after a while, I reached my breaking point. I confronted him, and he told me he'd decide when things were over. That's when he hinted he'd set his sights on your wife next, and well, now here we are. Are you going through with the divorce? I asked. Not yet, he replied, but it's on my mind. I only wish I had proof of everything. As I left Walt's place 10 minutes later, he seemed in better spirits. I'd shared a bit of my plan to give him hope, but kept enough under wraps to avoid any risk if Barry somehow caught wind of it. I was feeling pretty good as I drove aimlessly toward home. It was early afternoon, and I had no interest in being there when Lynn arrived. As I turned onto a busy street, something familiar caught my eye. I say familiar, even though I'd never actually been there before. However, I had seen a picture of the place for as long as I'd worked for Barry. A large, cartoonish sign that read AM Motors drew me in. I pulled into the lot, and within seconds, 4 eager salesmen swarmed around me. Leading the pack was a tall guy sporting a handlebar mustache and a ridiculous 10-gallon hat, outpacing the others with ease. "What can I do for you?" he asked in a thick accent that seemed almost too exaggerated to be real. "Name's Sam Colt, so which of these beauties can I get you into today?" Sam Colt? You've got to be kidding me, I thought as he shook my hand. No wonder people think Texans are dumb. Out loud, I said, "Well, Sam, I was just wondering what I need to do to get my name in the drawing for the $500. Aw, heck, son, we don't give away $500. We never draw for less than $5,000. You can enter for free if you agree to listen to a phone pitch, receive some emails, and get added to our mailing list. Or you could buy a car and get an entry for every $1,000 you spend." At 5:30, I stepped into my office, fully aware now that I'd been set up. Anger fueled me as I searched for evidence to bring Barry down. I knew I needed to contact the others who'd been through similar ordeals with him. I sifted through the personnel files, quickly locating Steve Embry and Kenny Lawrence. Finding them wasn't hard once I accessed their college alumni networks. Using Barry's computer, I didn't worry about leaving a digital trail. I glanced at my watch. It was just after 6. The cleaning staff wouldn't arrive until 9, so I had time. I opened some financial files, looking through Barry's bookkeeping. As I searched, I noticed a suspicious absence of receipts from AM Motors, unlike the other clients. Suddenly, a voice startled me. "Find anything interesting?" I turned around to find myself face-to-face with Amy Stewart. There I was, caught red-handed after hours on Barry's computer with confidential files open. I was speechless. Amy's expression was unreadable, and I couldn't tell if she'd report me or was there for another reason. Before I knew it, I started sharing everything, from Barry's actions with my wife to the marriages he'd ruined. Amy rephrased her question. "Did you find anything that could bury this guy?" We left the office before the cleaning crew arrived and went to a small diner near her place. Over dinner, we exchanged notes, and she shared her own story. By the time she was done, I had learned things that completely changed my approach, and I had an ally. BM & Sons wasn't what I initially thought. It stood for Burkhart, Markowitz, and Sons. The agency was founded in the 70s by Jefferson Burkhart and Jacob Markowitz. Over the years, their sons joined, though Jefferson's son eventually joined the Air Force, and Jacob's youngest pursued his own path. 5 years later, Jacob's youngest son was imprisoned for trafficking illegal substances. During the trial, Jacob's health began to deteriorate. He soon left BM & Sons, and his eldest son took his place. Meanwhile, thanks to some corrupt political moves and bribing judges, Jacob's youngest son was able to return to his legitimate business, which he allegedly used as a cover for smuggling into the Houston area. Now Jefferson was running the agency alongside Jacob's son, Barry. Barry had changed his last name from Markowitz to masters, to distance himself from the public scandal surrounding his brother's prohibited substances dealing. One day, Barry approached Jefferson, admitting he had botched an advertisement and spent 2 days smoothing things over to avoid losing a major client. He used this mistake as leverage to push Jefferson out of the business. Jefferson's daughter, Margie, married a man named Peter Stewart, and they had a daughter named Amy. So Barry's been pulling these stunts for a long time, hasn't he? Yeah, he has. My grandfather owned up to the ad mistake, but that still didn't justify what Barry did. Let me guess. The ad was for AM Motors. Yes, it was. Do you know who owns AM Motors? Alan Markowitz, I replied. I didn't realize until now that he and Barry were brothers, but I knew they were working together. AM Motors only covers material costs for their advertising. Amy went on to explain how Barry frequently asked her out on dates or invited her to lunch. She had declined each time, and it was clear he was getting frustrated. I think that's why he made me stop working so closely with you, Billy. After we finished going over everything, Amy and I finalized our plan and called it a night. I got home after midnight and checked in on Lynn, who was fast asleep, clutching my old pillow as if she were holding on to something dear. I felt nothing toward her at that moment. I did feel a sense of relief knowing I wasn't facing Barry alone. Amy was grateful I'd uncovered so much, and now we had a way to stand up to him. She had originally thought she'd have to put up with his antics for a few more years before having the leverage to take action. Thursday night, an opportunity presented itself. Barry casually mentioned he'd be busy with a major meeting and gone for the weekend. He told me to pass the message along to Lynn, and I thought, why not call her yourself, buddy? As he left the office. That evening I went home, mowed the lawn, and spent some time in the garage. When I came inside to shower, Lynn was there, dressed in a new outfit. Do you like it? She asked. I chuckled and replied, You're wasting your time. Your weekend plans got canceled. Without missing a beat, she said, Well then, maybe you could take advantage. I just laughed. What's so funny? She asked. The idea that I'd be interested in any part of this now. That's hilarious. What do you mean? She demanded. I'm still your wife. This is still your home. Isn't there someone else you'd rather be with? I shot back. This whole thing started because you thought it'd be fun to humiliate me. I want nothing to do with you. She stormed off to the bedroom, and I took my shower, grabbed my pillow, and settled on the couch. She must have been annoyed because I didn't hear any more from her until almost midnight. The next morning, Amy approached me at work with a mischievous smile. Guess who's working on the AM Motors ad today? Is she bigger than a bread box? Very funny. I need you to review it when I'm done. I'm sure Barry's up to something. Did you know he asked me to go to Florida with him this weekend? I shook my head. Yep. I told him I had plans and he got all upset. Then he handed me the AM Motors account. Well, the jerk couldn't get his way any other way, so he's using his authority. He must be hoping you don't quit. Oh, I'm not quitting. I've got plans, she said with a wink as she headed back to her cubicle. Later, after everyone had left for the day, I reviewed Amy's work as she'd asked. It looked just like every other AM Motors ad we'd done. I made copies of the information sheets and took a picture of her ad. So, do you have plans for the weekend? She asked. Just avoiding the wife, I replied. You? No plans. But if you want to completely avoid her, I've got extra room. I'm not offering my body, but we could have a fun weekend. And fun we had. My fun started with ignoring Lynn's complaints as I packed a bag. I even included work clothes for Monday just in case I didn't feel like coming home until late. Her protests echoed in the house. Where are you going to be? Not here. If I spoke other languages, I might have said more to her as long as she didn't speak them too. My grandfather taught me a few swear words in Polish, but I wasn't in the mood to curse at her. She was crying as I walked out. Some might call me a jerk, but I couldn't stay with a woman who enjoyed humiliating me. I planned to watch the surveillance footage later. I wanted to see her reaction when she realized I'd left my phone on the couch. Amy and I had a fantastic weekend. When I arrived at her place, she came out with an overnight bag and told me to drive. A few blocks in, I asked, "Do we have a destination, or are we just escaping?" She laughed. "Oh, we're going to a friend's house. They've got a place on Lake Conroe." Her friends had a gorgeous home. If Lynn had seen it, she'd want us to sell our place and buy one like it. She'd complained before that we didn't live in the woodlands or the heights, but our home was nice, so eventually she stopped wishing. We spent Saturday on their boat. Tony and I drank several beers, trying not to gawk at Amy and Kathy lounging in their bikinis. When Amy decided to go water skiing, I think we were both secretly hoping for a wardrobe malfunction. That evening, Tony treated us to a Texas BBQ feast with plenty of food and beer. A few more friends joined, and everyone seemed to have a great time. Amy introduced me simply as a friend, while Tony and Kathy referred to me as Amy's friend. At one point, one of the women pulled Amy aside, saying she shouldn't let me go because I was a keeper. I caught a thoughtful look on Amy's face but looked away before she noticed. On Friday night, we each had our own room, but since Tony and Kathy had a couple visiting from Baytown, they asked if I'd mind sleeping on the couch so their guests wouldn't have to make the drive back. I didn't mind at all. If I'd been at home, I'd have been on the couch anyway. Kathy went to get me a pillow and blanket. As I looked at the sofa, I realized it was the exact same one I had in my own living room. I heard Kathy talking to someone but couldn't make out what she was saying. Eventually, I heard her say, "Okay, well, good night then," followed by a bedroom door closing. A moment later, Amy came out instead. "Hey, I have a full-size bed. No need for you to sleep on the couch, Billy. I trust you to be a gentleman." Knowing it would be pointless to argue, I followed her to the bedroom. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, and I wasn't too worried about anything inappropriate happening. "I trust you to be a gentleman." Those words echoed in my mind the next morning when I woke up to find Amy nestled against me, my hand resting on her shoulder. I carefully tried to move my hand, but she shifted, pressing a little closer. "Not yet, Billy," she murmured sleepily, her voice soft before she drifted back to sleep. Later I woke up alone, her scent lingering on the pillow beside me. After a shower, I joined everyone on the deck, where they were enjoying bacon, eggs, and coffee. Amy gave me a big smile as I sat across from her, and we chatted casually over breakfast. I couldn't shake the feeling of warmth from that morning, and I noticed Amy glancing at me a few times with a look that lingered. We left in the early afternoon, and I thanked Tony and Kathy for their hospitality. Kathy mentioned that we'd likely see more of each other, which I took as a friendly gesture from some genuinely kind people. We had a light conversation as we drove back home, reviewing our plan. I was convinced Barry would make his move on Monday, so we discussed our backup strategies. If he tries to pressure me into a one-on-one, I'll just make him fire me. When that happens, I'll take my shot too. I won't let you face it alone. "I know you won't, Billy," she replied. I glanced at her when she said that, noticing a smile I couldn't quite interpret. Then it hit me. She had been calling me Billy. I tried to recall the first time she used the name, but I couldn't. Still, I liked how it sounded. When we arrived at Amy's apartment, I carried her bag to the door. "You can stay here tonight if you want, Billy. I promise I won't bite." The choice between staying with Amy and going home to deal with Lynn's nonsense was easy. Amy did raise an eyebrow when she saw me bring my work clothes in. "Were you that sure I'd let you stay Sunday night too?" she teased. I laughed. "I hoped, but I was also prepared to get a hotel room instead of listening to Lynn's drama. I had planned to sleep on Amy's couch, but she wouldn't allow it. "I've got a queen-size bed and I only use half of it. We shared a bed last night and nothing happened, so we can do it again." She gave me a strange look, but quickly smiled when she noticed I was watching. "I know you're still married, and I don't want you to sink to her level. You're a better person than that, Billy. But I have to admit I loved waking up in your arms this morning." We slept in nearly the same clothes as the night before, me in shorts, her in a long t-shirt. But I woke up to find us in a new position. She was nestled against me, her face resting on my chest, one leg draped over my hip, and her arms wrapped around me. My own arms had found their way around her, and I was grateful for a bit of space between us. For a moment it felt perfect, like I could stay there forever, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the warmth of her presence. That's when it hit me. Barry hadn't just taken away my wife. Lynn had also been my closest friend and confidant. As I lay there, I realized my life with Lynn was over. I couldn't look at her without feeling a deep sense of betrayal. Amy was incredible, but I doubted she'd want to be with someone 7 years older and trying to find his way again. I drifted back to sleep until Amy's alarm went off. We got up, taking turns in the bathroom. I showered first and got ready while she was still in the shower. My plan was to reach the office before Jane or anyone else arrived. As I was about to leave, Amy came out with her hair wrapped in a towel and wearing a cozy bathrobe. I felt a bit awkward, but I told her I'd see her at work. She smiled warmly and told me to hurry along. Arriving at the office 15 minutes before anyone else, I completed my task quickly, brewed some coffee, and settled at my desk. Within half an hour, everyone had arrived, and Amy gave me a curious look as she walked to her cubicle. Barry, as usual, was the last to arrive. He went directly to his office, speaking to no one. After lunch, he called Amy in, though I couldn't make out anything from where I sat. 20 minutes later, Amy returned to her desk, but I didn't catch her expression. Barry, on the other hand, seemed unusually upbeat as he left around 4. By 5, everyone else had cleared out. I stayed an extra 10 minutes, finishing up a few things before heading home. Lynn wasn't home when I arrived. I put my weekend clothes in the wash, then headed to my office to review the surveillance footage. I saw that Lynn hadn't left the house all weekend until she went to work that morning. I erased any private moments from the footage and then listened to 2 phone calls she'd made. The first was with her Aunt Lily, who she spoke to about ordinary things, so I skipped to the next one. I couldn't identify the person she was speaking to, but I heard her say, "You what?" followed by, "Oh, that's going to be amazing. I could use a fun night." Just then, I heard Lynn arrive home, so I opened my browser and pretended to be reading an article. A few moments later, I sensed her standing in the doorway. "Can we talk?" "You can," I replied. "I have nothing to say." "I missed you this weekend." "I didn't miss you. Why are you acting like this?" "Do I need to spell it out? You made choices that have hurt our marriage, and now you're acting like it's surprising that I'm not just fine with it." "I didn't ruin anything," she said. "Barry and I are making things more fulfilling. I could even ask him to reconsider certain things if you wanted." "When did you stop caring about our relationship?" "I'm done pretending there's any connection left. The only thing I get out of this now is knowing who you truly are." I motioned for her to leave. "Let's just avoid each other unless necessary. I'd rather focus on my own life than think about any of this." As she left my office, I received a text from Amy. Her message was brief but encouraging. "It's on." On Tuesday, Barry approached me. "Are you leaving on time today?" "I have a few things to finish, so I'll leave about half an hour late," I replied. Amy hadn't been in the office, so my delay didn't raise any suspicion. "All right, I'll go grab dinner, but make sure you and Lynn are ready when I arrive." He gave me a pointed look before leaving. As soon as everyone was gone, I packed my personal belongings and left my resignation letter on Jane's desk. After one last look around the office, I realized I wouldn't miss it at all. When I got home, I found Barry already there. Lynn, in a silk robe, tried to greet me, but I brushed past her. "Where have you been?" "I was worried," she said. I didn't answer, and went straight to the living room where Barry was sitting, sipping wine. "I've been waiting for 10 minutes, Jacko. A man who wants to keep both his job and home shouldn't keep the one securing them waiting," he said, smirking. "But go ahead, have a drink. We're expecting a special guest." He exchanged a look with Lynn, and I headed to the kitchen for a beer. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Lynn ran to answer it, and Barry's face lit up with satisfaction. I heard her greet someone and the door close. When I looked up, Lynn and Amy had entered the room. "Ah, Amy, I'm glad you decided to save your job," Barry said with a smirk. "Jacko, you're in for a real treat." He looked between Lynn and Amy, his expression triumphant. Lynn's demeanor shifted, though she tried to stay composed. Barry, however, was eager to get closer to Amy, and as we made our way down the hallway, I glanced at my phone, noticing the messages I'd been waiting for. Just before reaching the room, Amy asked where the bathroom was, and I pointed it out. She thanked me with a small smile, carrying a small bag as she headed down the hall. Once inside, Lynn removed her robe, revealing her lingerie. Barry's eyes lit up, but I kept a neutral expression. I took off my shirt and unbuttoned my pants, commenting, "Can't wait until Amy sees this," ensuring they could hear me. Both of their expressions shifted, Lynn with irritation, Barry with a hint of apprehension. Barry reached into a bag beside him and pulled out a pair of black leather shorts. "These should keep things interesting," he said, tossing them to me. As I was putting on the shorts, Barry and Lynn teased me, but I didn't let it bother me. Just then, the bathroom door opened and Amy stepped out. I paused, stunned. Lynn gasped, and Barry looked over, unable to hide his reaction. Amy wore a baby blue corset with black lace details, her expression confident and captivating. Lynn quickly attempted to refocus Barry's attention, and he snapped back to reality. Despite her attempts to keep the evening's momentum, Barry seemed distracted, frequently glancing at Amy with wide-eyed admiration. I leaned back, glancing around the room. The tension in the air was thick, and as I adjusted the blinds slightly, a plan was already forming in my mind. When I turned, I noticed Amy watching me with a curious smile. I winked at her, and her smile grew wider. On the bed, Barry and Lynn were finally getting into it, when everything suddenly went sideways. A series of small explosions sounded from outside. Living near refineries, we were used to occasional loud noises, but by the sixth one, Amy shouted, "What was that?" I quickly threw my pants on over the leather shorts and rushed down the hallway. Opening the front door, I yelled, "Barry, your car's wrecked!" All 4 tires were flat, and the windshield and rear window were covered in cracks. It wasn't clear what had caused the damage. Barry ran down the hall and stopped when he reached the door. I couldn't tell if it was because of the sight of his crashed Lexus or the realization that he was without outerwear, but I didn't give him time to react. I showed him from behind, and he stumbled out the door and onto the path. I slammed the door shut, ignoring his shouts. Shortly after, Lynn came out of the hallway, at least sensible enough to wear a robe. "Where's Barry?" she asked, before noticing 2 other people in the living room. I'd let them in after shouting about Barry's car. "Who are these people? What's going on?" she asked. "Are you Lynn Jakswensky?" one of the women dressed in business attire asked. When Lynn nodded, she asked for her ID. Lynn handed over her driver's license. After checking it, the woman handed Lynn a stack of papers. "You've been served." Lynn turned pale as she looked over the papers, stunned. Amy reappeared with Barry's clothes in a shopping bag, now dressed in the outfit she'd worn when she arrived. The process server wished me a good evening and left. I stepped outside to find Barry hiding on my porch. A small crowd had gathered, laughing at the sight of him. The process server walked over to Barry and asked, "Are you Barry Masters?" Amy stepped onto the porch and answered, "Yes, he is. Here's his ID." The server handed Barry a stack of papers. "You've been served." I could have sworn she was laughing as she walked away, and Amy dropped his bag of clothes beside him. "You messed up, Jacko," Barry hissed. "I'm coming after you for assaulting me." "Suits me fine, Barry. That process server saw you run out and trip on your own. Read the papers. You're the one in trouble here." "You're fired, Jacko. Don't bother coming to work tomorrow." "No problem, Barry. Jane already has my resignation letter." I was about to say something else when the police arrived. Barry claimed I'd assaulted him, but no one backed up his story. In the end, they just issued him a citation for indecent exposure. I was a bit disappointed that a tow truck came for Barry's car before he even looked at the papers he'd been served. I went back inside to find Lynn sobbing on the couch. "Where are you going, Lynn?" "Going? I don't understand." "Where are you going?" "I don't want you here anymore, and I'm not leaving." "Bill, baby, I don't want a divorce. I love you and only you." "If that were true, we wouldn't be here. You got excited about disrespecting me and chose to be with Barry. That's when our marriage ended." "But you'll lose everything." Barry said, "Barry was full of it, Lynn. I own this house. It was in my name before we got married, so it's mine. I've already filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and cruelty. My lawyer says, with the evidence I've provided, I won't lose much in this divorce. There's also an agreement drafted for irreconcilable differences if you'd rather just sign and be done. It gives you 30% of our assets, and I take on none of your debt." "Cruelty? How can you claim cruelty? Choosing Barry over me and humiliating me counts as cruelty. I have everything on video. I also have footage from times I wasn't around. But you'll need my income now that Barry fired you." "That's none of your concern. If you need help, I'll carry your things to your car. But let's move quickly. Amy and I have plans for the evening." Lynn ran out to her car in tears and drove off. Over the next few weeks, she gradually moved her belongings out. She ended up moving in with another bank teller who needed a roommate to help cover her expenses. In the end, we split assets 70-30, and fortunately, I never had to use the videos I had gathered. The only thing she asked was to leave the furniture with me. I saw Lynn a couple of years later. She'd gained some weight but still looked well. She had a man by her side and they were pushing a stroller. I don't think she noticed me, which was perfectly fine. I tracked down Barry's former employees, and out of the 7 I contacted, 4 agreed to join a class action lawsuit for harassment. Steve and Kenny were particularly motivated, and even Jane got involved. Walt and Marion also joined, with Marion volunteering to testify without asking for a full share. When Joan realized Barry was about to face serious legal trouble, she filed for divorce, hoping to claim her half of their assets before his downfall. But when her role in his schemes came to light, she was informed that her share would be divided only after the harassment case concluded. During the trial, investigators found discrepancies in Barry's records. As they dug deeper, they uncovered large sums of unexplained income linked to BM and Sons and AM Motors, along with evidence of prohibited substances transactions. Allen fled just before the DEA could apprehend him, while Barry was arrested outside the courtroom. Later, Joan was also arrested with 5 ounces of narcotics in her possession. After the lawsuits wrapped up, the government seized what was left of Barry's and Joan's assets. Each of us received $200,000 from the settlement. Barry was sentenced to 30 years, and Joan received 10. Allen eventually turned up in a dumpster in Medellin, Colombia. The night Lynn was served with her papers, I told her that Amy and I would be spending time together on her couch. I didn't actually plan to do it, but I knew the thought would hurt her more than anything. Amy was in on the plan, and I stayed close by, leaning against the back of the couch. The weight of everything that had happened suddenly hit me, and I felt like I might collapse. My whole world had been upended. I had no wife, no job, and my future hinged on a lawsuit that could take ages to resolve. I stood there feeling broken when Amy wrapped her arms around me. She didn't seem to mind that I was feeling so vulnerable. "It's over, Billy," she said softly. "She can't hurt you anymore." After a while, I started to feel better. When I looked at Amy, I realized she had changed back into her corset. "When did you put that back on?" I asked. "When you were busy kicking that nasty woman out. Do you like it?" she replied, smiling. I nearly told her it wasn't fair to tease me with something I couldn't have, but instead I accidentally said, "Like it?" "Not really, it's just reminding me that I'm still stuck in these shorts." "I can fix that," she said. I half expected her to start getting dressed again, but instead she undid my belt and slid my pants down. I must have looked surprised. "I want this, Billy. I've liked you since the day we met. When Jane told me about what Barry was doing, I knew I could be with you. Last weekend was incredible, and I want every weekend to feel like that, at least the part where I wake up next to you." "I had no idea you felt that way." "Wait, Jane knew? How did she find out?" Amy smiled. "Jane is my aunt, married to my Uncle Dennis. She started working for my grandfather long before Barry was around, and she changed her last name in her records so Barry never figured it out. After Walt left, he called her to keep an eye on you. She overheard Barry inviting himself over through the intercom. Jane always thought highly of you," she added, leaning in for a kiss. Before I realized it, my leather shorts were on the floor along with Amy's outfit. So even though I thought I'd only joked about me and Amy on the couch, she made sure that wasn't the case. Later, we went back to her place to sleep. Neither of us wanted to stay in the bed where Lynn had been with Barry. With our settlement from the lawsuit, Amy and I bought a house near Tony and Kathy. I hired a management company to look after my old place, and they've kept it well maintained with good tenants. Amy saw it as a security for me, though she never thought I'd need it. Today, Amy and I co-own a large advertising agency. Her Uncle Dennis partnered with us. It's the kind of agency Barry could only dream about. Walt and Jane work with us too, though Jane mostly stays to keep busy. Amy and I split the responsibilities, and we're never in the office at the same time. When one of us is at work, the other is at home with our 2-year-old son, Jefferson David, named after his great-grandfather and my father, and our 5-year-old daughter, Sadie Marie, named after our mothers. The best part is waking up next to the love of my life. Amy's beauty only grew after having our kids, and she constantly reassures me of her love. I couldn't ask for anything more.